It's time for a reality check.
We're here to deconstruct health and fitness trends and provide tangible advice so you can become 1% better with each choice starting today. Welcome back to Reality Check. We are your hosts, Jess and Jill, and you know we love a good guest podcast episode. So I have a friend who I met through some coaching programs on the internet, which is why I love social media in this time of life. But this is Lisamarie, and she does all of the things. I know that you've been a fitness coach for a really long time. I know, obviously, I know your background personally, but I'm excited for you to share that because I feel like your past career it really helped you kind of tie everything together into like what you do now, which I think is so cool. But I would love for you to intro yourself, and then we'll dive into what I think is such a good topic to kick off for January 2025. So give us the rundown on just like you and what you do and how you got here.
Of course. Yeah. Hi, I'm Lisamarie. Super excited to be here. I used to be a teacher. So I used to teach special education. So there was a lot of different interventions we would try to get students to change their behavior and be able to customize what they were doing in order to get them to do what other general population students were doing. And I loved it. And so, my background is in teaching. I eventually kind of moved on from there and started teaching other teachers how to teach. And then I also designed a curriculum at a school that was opening up. I'm from Seattle. So we helped actually design the curriculum for this new school, which was super exciting. And always on the side, I had been into health and fitness, or just trying to be into health and fitness, but never really knowing what I was doing, trying all the things and working really hard at all the wrong things. But it was back in 2014. I was working really hard at the gym, and one of the gym owners came up to me and he was like, "You work really hard. Have you ever thought about competing in a fitness competition?" And I was like, maybe. I'm kind of competitive in nature. So that sounds fun. So I eventually got into the competing world, which was absolutely wonderful, but I would never do it again because it really fostered this all or nothing mentality and a really bad sense of normal in terms of eating behaviors and food freedom and all the things that I coach now. And so I went through a really long journey of regaining what normal meant and finding a really good balance with fitness and nutrition and just being comfortable in my own body again, not being competitor lean. And people saw me go through that online because I shared my whole journey online. And so people started asking, how did you do it? How did you overcome it? I struggle with the same things, feeling very inspired because they could relate. We all had the same problems. And so that's when I first started kind of actually coaching people on the methods that I use kind of on myself to get them to a more balanced way of thinking. And my fitness coaching program was born, which was super exciting, and it grew, and we started helping women all over. And so back in 2020 is when I actually was I want to do this full time. And it was hard for me to step away from the teaching space, but I eventually kind of let that part of me go and just did fitness coaching full time. And it's been great. So we work on food freedom, balance, just helping women navigate their fitness journey in a really sustainable way, in a way that feels good. The company's grown, and now I'm even coaching other coaches on how to do that inside of one of my signature programs, Macro Coach Pro. That's just a little bit about me and teaching, now coach.
Yeah. I didn't know. I think I missed the part in your whole process, in previous conversations with you. I didn't know that you also did teaching teachers type of thing, which I think is so funny that you kind of went through the same evolution within your career and what you do, which is so cool. And, we actually, it's probably worth noting too that one of our field coaches took Lisamarie's program because we just align so well in terms of our approach with clients and behaviorally and just the right things to do from just a health standpoint. So I think that's so cool. And if you are a coach listening to this, highly recommend, because honestly, I really don't think there are other programs out there that approach, obviously off topic, and I'm just like promoting, myself, but I don't think there's a lot of programs out there that talk about this type of stuff when it comes to coaching. Like, there are a gazillion options when it comes to learning nutrition and macros and adjusting them and different phases of deficit and maintenance, whatever. But like the actual implementation of when a client says like, I have a long commute home and I don't know what to do, or I have 3 kids and I don't know when to get my workouts in. Like, that's the difference between a coach in air quotes and like a really good, effective, like true health coach, is when we can help them with that behaviorally. And I think that's so cool that you're helping on such a large scale now, because you're teaching other coaches how to do that effectively to God knows how many clients, right, in the future. So I think that's really cool.
And one of the coolest things I've seen from our coach, so it's a newer coach of ours who has gone through your program. One of the coolest things I've seen is her messaging and her ability to communicate with her clients right off the bat, which I think has taken us years of trial and error and learning how to communicate in that way. She challenges her clients in a way that they're coming to these answers by themselves, and they're making choices, and they know the expectations of their choices. Like, they know what the possible outcomes are of their choices. But at the end of the day, she's not a coach wagging her finger and telling them what to do. She's saying like, okay, here's your different paths. Which one feels right for you? And I feel like that's a learning thing that a lot of coaches go through, is going from this, like, I know everything, I'm just excited to share, versus actually coaching and guiding them on their journey. I feel like your course really helped her just do that right off the bat.
Yay. I love to hear that. That's great. Because like it's cool, because I don't think a lot of people, and even your guys' clients listening to this, like, there are strategies to like overcome things. Like, there's strategies for coaches to coach them. But as a client, like, when you have a really good coach, like, there is like tactical strategy for really navigating any sort of issue, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit today. But yeah, it's cool. It's like things work when you work them.
Yeah, I know. It's like the most frustrating part, though, too, about the industry on the other side of it, because it's like, how do you teach a potential client that like, that's the difference, right? Like, nobody wants to go buy a program that they're like, I have tangible solutions to overcome your fucked up behaviors. Like, no, they're like, whatever, like, I just want to lose 30 pounds, right? Like, so it's so hard to explain the difference between a really good, effective coach that's going to get you sustainable results in that manner, right? Like, you just have to do it.
Right.
So,
like every single tool is unique to that particular client's roadblocks. And until we hit those roadblocks, they're not going to know what the solutions are that we're bringing to the table, because we're not just dumping a handful of solutions. It's like, it needs to be individual and custom to them. So it is kind of tough to just like sell that value right off the bat. And then usually like 3-6 months in, our clients are like, oh my gosh, this has changed my whole life. It's wild.
Yeah. We just got to get them to that point. That's all.
Yeah.
But specifically talking about one of these strategies, for you guys listening, there was a reel that Lisamarie posted. It was a couple weeks ago now. We're recording this on December 5th, but it was a couple weeks ago, and it was so good that I messaged her and I was like, you've got to come talk about this on the podcast. Like, this is a really effective message that I think so many people need to hear, especially, I talked about this before we started recording, but especially going into a new year of not dealing with your same bullshit, right? When it comes to approaching health, fitness, anything of that nature. So I'm really excited to talk about this. And it's funny, we were kind of talking about how to approach this topic, but it is how to really just like have awareness around kind of what Jess just said, like your life. What are your roadblocks? What are the things that are actually keeping you stuck in terms of making progress, whether it's weight loss or just your health and goals in general, right? This really can apply to any area of life. Obviously, we're talking about fitness and health and weight loss specifically, but it was such a good topic, and I want to dive into it. Do you want to give us like a brief overview? I did write down your quote that I feel like can summarize it well of prepare and prevent, don't repair and repent. I was like, can we just shout that from the rooftops? So we're
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I love it because, so this topic can be a little bit like spicy because like, I feel like, especially going into the new year, there are people that know what they struggle with, and they're like so gung-ho on like, okay, I'm going to change my behavior, or I'm going to like have a fresh 2025, or I'm going to do the thing. Like, even if you're listening to this podcast, like you probably said that at the beginning of the year, and like maybe you are still struggling with the same things that you were in January. So it's like, the reel was basically talking about how do you actually overcome these things and like prepare and plan for them, so you don't fall like victim to just being like a victim in these situations, or even having all these things just happen to you. I feel like going through the year, there are things we can do to prepare and like take more ownership and control over our decisions and like what is faced in front of us, even if we can't control that, versus just kind of like letting things happen to us. And so that's kind of what the reel was talking about, of different like strategies and things you can try, so you're not just like letting things just always happen to you, and you can take charge of them, which is really important in a fitness journey for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right in that we do get so gung-ho from the beginning of like, we're motivated and we have that, like, I always joke that, when people start our program, I'm like, listen, first day, first week, first month is going to be so boring. It is not your normal dopamine hit. I want it to just feel like you woke up and you're like, did I sign up for this thing? Because it really should be so seamlessly integrated into your life. And it shouldn't be this 10,000 steps, a gallon of water, 5 workouts this week, if you're not doing anywhere close to any of those things. Not to mention their motivation, that obviously we know is very fleeting, might carry them through some challenges, and they have enough of that dopamine that like, it's okay. They can like brush it off, and eventually they're like, I can't do this shit anymore. Right. And then they quit. And it's like, no, we just defeated the whole purpose. And that's, I think, I don't even know how to get that message across to people, that like, that is the wrong way. That is the problem in and of itself, is that you're trying to jump to like chapter 20 in a book when you're on chapter like 3, right? Like, you got to just turn the page here. You're not going to know what the fuck is going on in chapter 20. And then like Jess said, you don't know those roadblocks until they come up. And I know you do a great job with this too, Lisamarie, is like when we're talking with clients and we're mapping things out on like a timeline scale, it's not because we're like, we're going to lose this many pounds by this date. It's because we're like zooming out and saying, hey, summer's coming up. What do you have going on? What does life typically look like for you in that season of life? Back to school is coming. We had so many moms that were like, what's a workout? I don't know, for the month of September. And it's like, great. We know that when we're going into it. Now we're not planning for 4 and feeling like a failure. Let's scale back ahead of time and know this is how we're going to move these puzzle pieces around. And I think obviously that's like the premise of this, right? Is like not just taking it one day at a time. Like, yeah, we want to do that. We don't want to jump ahead, but really being prepared in terms of like things that could come up. And also knowing too that sometimes shit's just going to hit the fan and you are going to screw up, and we take that as a learning lesson. It's not you failed and you screwed up and everything's wrong. It's like, great, you went on a camping trip and you overate, and that's something you do every couple of weeks in the summer. What are we going to do on the next one? Right. And it's like, oh, that's it. Like, that's all we have to do to change things going forward. So I think that's really what this is about, is what is your actual problem that's preventing you from taking the next step forward and taking the next step forward. So you called it
overcoming victim mentality. I think a lot of times we call it control the controllables, right? Like, these things aren't, if things, there's going to be things that happen to us, right? Like, this is life. There's going to be surprises in those situations. Mm-hmm. What are the things that we can do? And what are the things we're willing to do? Because it's okay if there's some things we're not willing to do, but then I'm not going to complain about those things. I need to own it in either direction, right? Like, regardless of my choices, I'm owning the things and controlling the things I can control.
Yeah, for sure. I think a huge part of this too is, like if you are going on a camping trip, or you do have things happen and you feel like, oh, I can't get it right, or like it never goes my way, or I just like, I tried to plan and then this happened or this happened. It's like, one, that is okay, right? And part of what I was talking about in that reel is like, okay, let's identify these patterns of like, if we know that something always happens, or you always get hungry after work, or you always don't want to go to the gym after work, or you always get stuck in traffic, and so, or you always are on the go and you're busy, like, that's great. So like, don't get mad about those things always happening. Like, now that we know that, we can actually plan for it and prepare for it, because like that is a pattern that you see that is constantly being a barrier in your fitness journey. And that gives almost a little bit more optimistic view of it too, because we don't have to just say, oh, well, this sucks, or like this always happens to me, or I always struggle on the weekends and I'm really frustrated. It's like, cool. Well, now we actually have something we can prepare for and plan for, even if it's like tweaking it 1% each time to like get it just a little bit better. I think, part of like, Jill, what you were saying at the beginning of like, we don't have to go from like 0 to 60. Like, we can take every weekend or every social event or every camping trip or whatever it is, and like just get a little bit better at it each time, and not expect like, oh, I failed one weekend and I'm going to be perfect the next. Like, that's a huge jump, and like that should never be the expectation anyway. So it's like, okay, what is one thing we can do next time to make it just a little bit better? And then the next time a little bit better. And if you can view your journey as kind of this process of just getting better at things, not being the best at everything all the time, that's where like, one, the journey becomes a little bit more enjoyable for sure. But two, you're actually like, you're learning, right? And you're not like setting false expectations of yourself. And I think when people fail, that's when they feel like, okay, well, I don't have control because I wasn't able to like implement on it. And now I feel like a failure and I just want to give up. It's like, we don't have to view it that way, right? We can just view it as like, yeah, that didn't go well.
Yeah.
Like, let me try better next time. Like, let's figure out why that didn't go well so I can try better next time. And obviously having a coach that can help talk you through that and figure out what to tweak is super helpful. But I think that's a big missing piece people have.
I like that you talked about it being, it's like not a special occasion anymore, right? If it starts to become a pattern, then that's where a good coach can help you create systems so that you don't need to feel like you need to rely on your willpower. Like, all of our willpower sucks. Like, if something is just thrown at us, but if we know that this thing is happening repeatedly, we can zoom out and say like, okay, cool. How can I prepare for that event? And that's where your like prepare and prevent comes into play. A good coach is going to help you create systems to make choices easier on your future self.
And I think too, you said like, it's also important to know that sometimes you will plan, you'll have a plan in place and you're like, I'm going to like knock this out of the park. And you come back and you're like, what, this didn't work. What happened? And it's like, that's okay. That's also data and that's also helpful. And it doesn't mean the plan is perfect. It is always going to be trial and error. I don't know anything in life that you just make a plan and everything works out perfectly every single time for what you're doing. So it's also knowing that that plan is fluid and it can change, and it might work at one point in your life and later it might not be effective anymore too. So I think it's just like you said, when you can zoom out and just be a little bit more like objective about it, and it makes it so much easier to like be detached and be so less like emotionally driven about every little thing that goes like air quote right or wrong. Yeah. And it makes it just so much more enjoyable. And then you're just like living life. And honestly, I didn't really think about it, but like in this moment, as we're talking about this, I feel like that's the difference between somebody that lives the lifestyle and doesn't, is that we can be objective and we can say like, I made that choice. Probably wasn't the best one. Not going to do that again. Right. Or we do say going into it, I know, well, this is going to go, I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to drink a little too much, eat a little too much, whatever. And you're making that choice, but we can own that and we can just strategize and move on. And that's the difference, I think, between somebody who's still struggling and feels like this isn't my life versus people like us that have been doing this for a really long time that seems like it's easier for us. It seems like we're more go with the flow. And it's like, no, we just know how to be objective and we're not tied to a number on the scale or anything like that to determine our success. Hopefully that word vomit just made sense.
Yeah. And I think, even with people like us who have been on our fitness journey for a while, maybe it does seem really easy. Like, I still plan a lot of my day around like hitting my protocols. Like, it's not like I just wake up and it magically happens and everything falls into place or nothing gets thrown at me, right? Even still to this day, I've been on my fitness journey for a decade this year, going on my 11th year now. I'm still planning ahead. Like, if I have a weekend away, I'm still looking at the menu ahead of time. I'm still thinking, okay, am I going to be offered another drink? If I do, like, what's my plan going to be? Should I work in an extra drink and pre-track it just in case? Should I pack a protein bar? Should I eat a bigger breakfast? What if traffic is bad and I'm going to be out longer? Like, I'm still thinking about all those things. And I feel like that's where the preparation comes in of like, if you're brand new to this, yeah, all those thoughts are going to not come as naturally. And that's where working with a coach is really helpful, because it's like they're going to ask you those questions and make sure you're prepared. But it never really stops, right? So if you feel like, okay, well, I just like things are going to be out of my control, or I don't know what's going to happen, or like I'm going away this weekend, or I'm hanging out with friends, like I just can't stay on track. It's like, well, you can, you just have to prepare and like plan and ask yourselves questions of like, what if this happens? What if that? Like, what can we prepare for so we can control our controllables, or at least like have somewhat of a game plan, even if it's not like perfect. And a lot of times what I tell my clients is like, let's have a plan A and a plan B, right? Plan A is like our ideal scenario and what we can plan for, but let's have a fallback plan just in case. Like, let's go in, like, let's look at the menu ahead of time. Let's track our food to the best of our ability. And if you get there and that thing's not on the menu, or you guys decide to like do like family style and like share everything, your plan B is like, just try to not go over your calorie goal, right? Like maybe we don't worry so much about the macros since that's not going to be realistic given the situation. Like just try to stay within your calorie goal and like use the hunger scale to like help with your fullness levels, right? So always having that plan A and plan B, because I think especially with food and when people are like planning around that or like feel unsure about that, it's not everything is going to fall to a T, but that's where in the reel, I also talked about this like bare minimum mentality of like bare minimum, like what can we do to stay on track? Even if it's not your ideal scenario, like that's honestly okay, especially if these things are kind of one-offs and like you are so consistent so much of the time, where the camping trip or the weekend or the day you get stuck in traffic, like these are not going to be necessarily your normal all the time. And like we were saying before, if they are, then like we can see patterns in that and like prepare better. But for the things that come up that are like out of left field that like you just had no control over, you can still control like what you put in your mouth or like what you choose to do, right? Like no one's literally like force feeding food down your throat. Like you can still control portions if you can't control the macros. Like there's always this like bare minimum to hit. And I think once people realize that too, it's like, okay, it doesn't have to be, I'm on plan and I planned and I did it, or, well, that went to shit, not going to do anything, just start fresh tomorrow type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And when you talked about how like we still plan, we still think, it does become easier. So you're still doing the same things, but the longer you do it and the more you can do it in a gradual approach type way, like if you're getting 1% better every day over the course of time, these thought patterns for us are now just our normal, right? These are our new habits. So we're still doing the same thing, but it doesn't feel like as hard of work because now it's my natural inclination to see, oh shoot, I'm running low on protein. I better go grab something out of the freezer to thaw out for my prep tomorrow, right? Like that is now my habit, and it becomes your new norm. So we're saying these things are going to be forever things, right? But they will feel easier the more and more you implement them. So it's really good having somebody there to kind of guide you through to help you while you're creating the habits at the beginning, because that's the hard part.
It is, yeah. And using it as, each time you go through something that you have to plan for, use it as an opportunity to be like, okay, this is my opportunity to get a little bit better at it. Like, don't let it stress you out too much where it's like, maybe you are a little bit overwhelmed, but it doesn't have to be super stressful or, this do or die thing. It's literally just saying this is like one more opportunity for it to start to feel a little bit easier and to like get the reps in of like going through these things. So like you said, it does become more second nature, but it's never going to become second nature. It's never going to get easier if you avoid the things, always just decide to give up when things come up, or you don't actually use it as an opportunity to practice those thought patterns or like even communicate with your coach that thing is happening so they can like help you work through it.
Yeah. And you talked about like bare minimum mentality. And I think it's also important to say like, sometimes I have clients that are in a whole season of life where it is the bare minimum is all they can give. And like, that's okay, right? Like as a coach, my job isn't like, you really should be doing more. You really should be doing this. This is X, Y, and Z, right? As long as you know that giving the bare minimum, like what your expectation is on the other side of that. You can't say, I can only give the bare minimum. And then every check-in be like, I'm not changing. I'm not this. My physique's this. I'm whatever, right? X, Y, and Z. You have to make sure, and Justin, I talk about this a lot, that your inputs align with your expectation of your outputs, right? I think that's super important to understand too when we're talking about this, that we're implementing bare minimum as a strategy for certain situations or certain points in life or one-off things, but it can't be a way of living at the bare minimum and then expecting change to happen on the other side of it too. So can we just walk through really quick, like your like list that you had in this, just so I can make sure that we hit them all like super clearly in terms of the strategies and the things that you pointed out surrounding not having a victim mentality.
And I want you guys to like take out a pen and paper and take notes on this. Like use this as a framework. Next time you feel like you're stuck and you're like, I don't know, this just keeps happening. Go through these things. And again, in Lisamarie's post that we're referring to on Instagram, she's talking to coaches of like, okay, we need to probe our clients to figure out what's the real problem, what's the real roadblock that they need to overcome. You guys can, even if you don't work with a coach, you can ask yourself these same questions. So we want you guys to kind of like take it and shift it and use this strategy on yourself. Okay, go ahead. So framework for overcoming victim mentality.
Yeah. So we'll run through like 5 or 6 strategies when you feel like you are struggling with victim mentality or just struggling to like navigate different circumstances or scenarios that you feel like, okay, then you just like fall victim to like having these things happen to you. So these are strategies that are going to help you actually like work on the things so you don't become a victim in the situation. So the first one I'm teaching people to do is probing questions to get to the root of the issue. So a good example here is if you always fall victim to, or just you land in a scenario where this is, you know, similar for my clients where they get home and their husband wants to order takeout. And so they kind of just like give in to that. They're like, okay, like, even though they know like they maybe shouldn't, or that's definitely not going to fit in their macros for the day or whatever it is. But it's like, oh, my husband always does this. And it's just like, it's too hard to say no. And like, I have to eat the thing or whatever it is. It's like, okay, I want you to not think about the situation as the biggest problem, but more so like, what is the root of the actual issue here? Because the root of the issue isn't the takeout. Like the actual takeout can be worked into your macros. Like there are no good or bad foods anyway. But what's the actual root of the issue? Is it that you don't know how to talk to your husband about, hey, I want to plan for this stuff ahead of time so I can fit it in? Or, hey, I'm really trying to eat at home more because it does fit my macros a little bit easier, and is like having that conversation with your husband the struggle. Or let's say you go out to eat and you're just like, oh, I don't know how to track anything. And so might as well not, like, what's the point of tracking? I'm overwhelmed with it. I'm stressed out. I'm just going to get whatever. It's like, okay, eating out again, is not the actual issue. The root of the issue is like, maybe you haven't been educated or supported enough, or you don't know how to like navigate a menu or understand portion sizes because maybe you've never spent a period of time like weighing your food, right? So it's really thinking about, okay, take like zoom in on the situation a little bit more and say, okay, like I have this thing happen to me, like what, and a coach can help you with this, but like, what is the actual issue here? And that's where a coach can help probe those questions. Or if you are by yourself and you're a client just trying to figure this out, it's asking, okay, maybe it's not the takeout, maybe it's not the meal out, maybe it's not the camping trip, but like, what is the biggest barrier that's like causing the dominoes to fall versus like just the whole thing just like happening to you. So that's the first.
A great example, I think, for a lot of our clients is like they aren't working out at the gym. At face value, a coach, a not good coach, might look at that and say, oh, well, this client's just lazy. They just don't want to do it. Meanwhile, there could be a million different reasons why you're uncomfortable. Maybe the person has never set foot in a gym before and they're really anxious about people looking at them, right? Maybe it's because they go straight home and they think they're going to go back, but then they sit down on the couch and then they're like, well, now I'm tired and I don't want to go back out. Maybe they don't know how to use a specific machine. Like any of these particular roadblocks are going to require a different tool, a different solution, a different system system to overcome them, which is why it's really important. It's not like we're trying to be your therapist and get to the bottom of it. It's like we really need to know what the root of it is so that we can give you the best solution so that it makes your life easier. And then that's a less scary roadblock to overcome.
Yeah.
Sorry,
sure.
interjecting fitness. You gave the food example. I got to give the workout example. Okay, so probing questions to identify the root cause or the roadblock, like what's the biggest challenge? And then what's your second step?
Control the controllables, which we did touch on a little bit already, but it's really figuring out, okay, even if I can't control anything that's happening to me or anything that like came up, like think of what you can control, because I think a lot of the times in situations, clients feel like they don't have any control, where actually you do have a lot of control over like yourself and like what you do and the choices you make. So kind of like the example I was saying earlier, let's say you go to a social event or you go to a work dinner or you go to someone's house or even you go to Christmas dinner and you like want to stay on track, but you're like, okay, there's no protein options here. Like I can't get my protein in today, whatever. It's like, okay, but you can still control how much food you're putting in your body at that point. Or, maybe you can't control, if you get to the gym or not because, something came up, right? It's like, okay, well, could you adjust your schedule for the rest of the week? Like, do you really not have any control over your schedule? Or can you at least like get some steps in at home, right? So just almost clinging on to what you can and like being okay with that to control the controllables. Yeah.
Yep. Love
And then
that.
the third one I talked about was differentiating excuses from challenges. So I think a good reflection moment for people when they do go through things where, and maybe you can be real with yourself for a second if you're listening to this as a client, but it's like, are these really like just excuses I'm giving myself? Like, oh, it's late out, it's dark out, I'm tired, or the gym was busy, or like I just didn't feel like meal prepping, or I didn't have any groceries, right? Like excuses kind of, but those are challenges, right? Like whether it's an excuse or not, maybe it is really a challenge for you to get to the gym after work because you're tired that day, or it's a challenge for you to meal prep because you feel like it takes a long time or you don't know what to cook or, things like that. So I think whenever you're going through that, something I like to ask my clients is like, okay, let's say we had this challenge in the future and this exact same thing happened again. Like, how would we approach it? Like, if we were able to like plan ahead for this thing in the future, like how could we approach it to make it more ideal and more aligned with your goals? And like that can sometimes give a different perspective of just like, okay, yeah, it doesn't have to be an excuse and I don't have to let things happen to me. Like I could maybe plan around it or plan ahead for it to like overcome the challenge, if that makes sense.
Also, if a week goes good for you, reflect on it and see what did you do differently so that you're making that mental connection for future you, right? So like I've had clients who are like, oh yeah, I hit all my steps this week and it's the first time they've ever hit their step goal, right? Okay, well, what did we do? Like, let's keep going to play tennis on Saturdays if that's what helped you hit your steps, right? Like let's make those connections and kind of again, whether if you're working with a coach, that's our job, is to help you reflect and connect those dots. If you're by yourself, every week, if you're setting goals, make a time to check in with yourself and think, okay, what went really well this week? What could I work on next week?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people that are in my DMs that aren't clients, I'm like, there is a reason that we check in with clients every single week, right? It's so that they can reflect on the past week, like Jess said, what went well, what didn't, what's working, what's not, like what do we need to change about the plan? And I think so often when people are like going it on their own, they just go. I got to lose weight. I got to do this. I got to do this. I didn't check this box, whatever. And it's like, stop for a second and look, is like, there's something that maybe isn't working for you anymore. Is there something you can advance that like you have mastered at this point and you can challenge yourself again? So I think that regular reflection time is so important for that in general, but also to say, if things aren't working, are these excuses? Are they challenges? Is this something that I actually do have control over changing or not? And that's kind of like tying them all together, right? The probing questions, the controllables and excuses versus challenges. But I think it's important to have that reflection time so that you can figure this stuff out if you don't have a coach.
Yeah, for sure. And even like reflecting on, was what I did sustainable, right? So a big question we ask in our check-ins is what felt sustainable, what didn't, because maybe it was real, like maybe someone did get to the gym 4 times, hit their steps, hit their water, but maybe they felt like that was a really overwhelming week. There's no way I could like keep up with that week after week. So it's like, okay, how do we adjust it so we can keep it up? And it's not like this, flipping your life upside down just to achieve these protocols. And so I think a good check-in, helps assess what went well and why did it go well? Like what allowed you to hit that? What didn't go well? So what can we tweak? And with what we're doing, like, are you able to sustain this, or do we need to be more efficient or find better ways? Because sometimes you could implement something, but you hear it from clients all the time. Oh, I was able to keep up with it for a few weeks and then I eventually fell off track. It's like, okay, well, maybe because it wasn't actually realistic for you to like repeat, right? So
I like giving people permission to change their goals too. Like permission that your goals can change. If you're not hitting this thing week over week over week and you are really being honest with yourself, is it something you really want right now? It's okay to say like, no, that's not something I'm wanting or willing to work on. So then we shift gears and we focus on something else. And that's, I think, like the like radical ownership over like, okay, what are you have to be honest with yourself first before you're ever honest with a coach about your goals. And it's okay if different life seasons bring different goals. Maybe then you shift gears.
Yeah, I have that conversation a lot with clients where maybe they aren't implementing as like consistently or as like not aggressive. That's the wrong word for it, but just yeah. And knowing that like it's okay, and asking like, okay, how are we feeling about your progress, right? Like I've noticed like we're tracking a little less often, we're eating out a little bit more, we're maybe not getting in our steps in, like, which is totally fine. Like if you're happy with the expected results of the effort that you're putting in, that's also okay too, because I've had months where I want to sit back a little bit, right? And I have things going on and other things are a priority. I still want to be making some momentum, but I understand it's not going to be as quick if I'm like having a push month where I'm like really diligent and hitting my, protocols closer to like 90%, right? So I think understanding those expectations and like knowing it's okay to move a little bit slower if you are putting in a little bit less effort or consistency, there's nothing wrong with that. But then you also have to be okay with like slower progress if you're putting in kind of like what we're talking about, like the bare minimum, like you just have to expect smaller results, right? And gains of traction that way.
Yeah, love that. Okay, next one was identify patterns, right?
Yes. So I think it's really awesome actually when clients, or, if you have someone or you yourself are experiencing something that always comes up. Like I have so many clients coming into the program, they're so used to weekends always throwing them off, or they're used to always having to like, deal with a particular like social event or work related thing that comes up. And it's like, okay, let's identify some patterns then, right? Because now we can know what to expect. Like I know whenever I hang out with a certain group of friends, like they drink a little bit more, or we're always eating out, or I'm up later, or, things like that. And so when those things constantly happen, it's like, okay, what are patterns here, right? Every weekend you're messing up. Okay, why? Right? Get to the root of the issue, like the probing question. But then let's actually make a game plan based on that, because what's cool about that is you can know what to expect. So like maybe you do need to pack a protein bar because you're going to be up late with these friends. Or maybe you do know that like your commute home from work is like always going to take long on Thursdays because traffic is really bad. So like you need to maybe eat your pre-workout meal in the car, or make that your rest day if like getting to the gym is too late, right? So it's really figuring out, okay, if something is always happening, let's not be a victim and just be like, this always happens to me, but let's take ownership and like take control of it and say, okay, I know this is going to happen. Even if it doesn't, we're going to overplan and just assume it's going to happen. And so what are we going to do in that situation? Which is almost more empowering. And it's less of like, oh, why me? Or why does this always happen to me? But more so like, I know this is going to be a thing. So like, I'm just going to make sure it's not a thing. Like we had clients over Thanksgiving, they know whenever they have leftovers, it's like, it's still a free for all for them. So we planned and managed like the amount of leftovers from Thanksgiving they were going to have. And so it's just like little things like that, where it's like, what are your patterns? What can we do about those patterns and use them to like prepare you and strategize versus just kind of sit back and just keep letting these things always happen to you.
And I think zooming out like that and finding patterns also helps you to like it personally motivates me to make healthier decisions on the normal days, because it's like, okay, if I have a client where it's like, okay, well, we do trivia Tuesdays and thirsty Thursdays and then brunch on Sundays. And it's like, okay, well, you need to zoom out at your life and decide which of those things are really most worth it for you to indulge and splurge on, because every day is not a special occasion, right? So if this one event if the food experience isn't as meaningful for you, cool, make really nutrient dense choices at this thing. You can still go and enjoy the social occasion, knowing that Friday night you have this thing that you really look forward to food wise, right? So every single day is not a splurge. It kind of allows you to empower yourself to make those decisions on like, okay, this is just a Tuesday, right? Even though I'm still hanging out with my friends, like we don't want you guys to give up life stuff, but every day isn't a special occasion when it comes to like nourishing our body.
Yeah. And if I have multiple social events coming up, I'll look at those and say which ones are easier to make those nutrient dense decisions, or which ones will I be able to maybe have more control over what I'm eating, or like you said, which one's worth it to me. Because then if I need to be more balanced, maybe like with nutrients on a certain event on Friday, I'm more inclined to do that, knowing that's like, okay, my Sunday brunch is coming up. That's when I'm going to get my mimosa. That's when I'm going to get my yummy meal, right? And it makes the thing on Friday less of an issue, at least for me, because I have that thing to look forward to, and I feel better about my decisions because they're all balanced. So
it feels like a choice rather than a sacrifice then, because you're not playing these mental battles with yourself. You're choosing that Sunday mimosa is more worth it, right? I love looking at patterns in that same way.
Yeah. Well, when you're looking at patterns, sometimes, like Lisamarie, you said you have a group of friends that you just tend to eat out and drink more and whatever. Sometimes that might mean changing what you're doing. It might mean that you don't go to Thirsty Thursday every Thursday anymore, because it might not align with the goal that you want. And I think sometimes that's a tough realization. But like, I know for me that I used to be very social. I used to be very IFYM and drink every weekend because I was like, I can fit it. It's fine. And then one day that just didn't feel good for me, and that just didn't align for me anymore. And that did mean shifting who I spent my time with. It meant I don't want to go to so-and-so's house every Friday night and stay up until 2 a.m. eating snacks and playing cards. It doesn't feel good for me anymore. And that's not what I choose for myself. So I think it's also looking at patterns like that and knowing you are your own priority, and nobody can control what you do, and you can change that stuff at any time too.
For sure. And that kind of leads into the fifth strategy, is like empowering clients. So helping them to see, or if you're the client, helping yourself to see that this can actually be an area of growth, like where we can change. Like if you always go to Thirsty Thursday and you've always struggled with feeling like you're overdoing it, or you've always struggled with your weight, this is something we like tangible we can start to change. Like, let's make those little shifts of like, yeah, maybe you do a non-food related activity with these friends instead of Thirsty Thursday. And like, that's a huge change. Like that's going to make a really big difference. And like, that's again, your choice and you get to decide, but like, that's something that we can like actually start to work on tangibly, and like giving them those empowered choices to say, what is worth it? What is not? What am I willing to give up? What am I not? And like, we can have all the things. Can we have all the things all the time? No, but like, we still get to have all the things, and like, you get to decide what's worth it to you and what's not. And that's really cool. And so using all these things that maybe you have to figure out as like, change your perspective on it and see, and use it to empower yourself of like, these are things I can change. These are things I can work on, and like, it's my choice, and I get to do it. Right. So, I think it's all about how you view things. But when you can create that empowerment either for yourself or work with a coach that understands that, it can really change the game on letting things happen to you or like taking control of them.
Love that. I feel like we kind of touched on that a lot throughout this in terms of just how we respond to things. So I think that's great. And then one more, two more. What do we have?
I think that was.
Oh, the bare minimum, I think was.
Oh yeah, just the
We're gonna
bare
cover
minimum
that.
one, yeah, which we talked about a little
Oh,
bit.
I love this. This was so helpful. I think that reflection time, like I said, is so important to dive into things like this. And it's really just awareness around yourself and your own choices and behaviors, and knowing that it's always your choice, and whatever choice you make, you just have to be okay with the outcome of that decision. And if you're not, then you can change it. And if it's hard to change it, just know it's not an overnight thing and it takes time. Lisamarie, tell everyone where they can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah. So I'm primarily just on Instagram. So it's Lisamarie_WBFF Pro. So that's my Instagram. And you can find information on there for Macro Coach Pro, which is the certification program. So if you're a coach listening to this, check that out. Or just, listen to some of the reels if you're a client, because I teach a lot of coaches things, but they're so applicable to if you're on your fitness journey and if you want to, just get some coaching tips. I give a lot of like tangible coaching tips on there that you can implement to make your fitness journey a little bit easier.
We'll tag your social media and website and all that fun stuff in the episode notes. But thank you so much. This was so good. I am so excited for this episode to come out. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, talk to you soon.